to bring to you some very, very interesting work by Akshat Bhatt. And he's going to show to us and talk in detail about what all is done. So we'll just wait a while. So good afternoon once again. Happy to have you all join us. Let me begin by introducing myself. My name is Nien Sao, and I head the Department of Design at JSID. Today we are going to meet a very experienced, very interesting architect and interior designer who's going to be showing some of his projects which he thinks are really landmark projects for his experience and for us as well. So that's Akshat Bhatt, Principal Architect at Architecture Discipline. A few brief information about him. He graduated from the TVB School of Habitat Studies in 2002, then studied at the University of East London. After he completed his studies, he worked with Penoyar and Pasadena, Kahane and Associates in London. He started his own firm called Architecture Discipline in 2007. It's a multidisciplinary design studio that explores architecture through the scales of urban design, architecture, public art, installations, furniture, and product design. I'm going to ask Akshat to give us some time before he... So Akshat, just a few words to say hello and what all you've done, and then we'll move on to your first project. Akshat, you will have to unmute your mic. Your speaker is off. Yes.
Right, perfect. Yes. So I'm the principal of Architecture Discipline, or the founding principal now. The firm's grown beyond me. We've done many things over the last 10 odd years, or a little over a decade, and Make in India happens to be one of them. We've also done some very, very high, what is considered high technology work in architecture, such as a hotel called Mana at Ranakpur, a town hall called the Discovery Center at Bangalore, which can be dismantled, which is a 1 lakh square foot building that can be dismantled and moved every 8 years. And it takes about 8 months to assemble. And after which, or around that same time, we also started doing, lots of residential work, but a lot of hospitality and hospitality work for clients like Taj and Oberoi. And our speciality is in using new construction techniques and technology to make buildings to make buildings differently, that not only look different, but also last longer. As we learned that, the studio also sort of spreads itself into not only a very cutting edge modern expression, but also looks at reinventing old things to see how there is some historical significance or a lot of historical significance to things from the past, and how do you recreate that even though you don't have the same tools and technology available to you today, and how do you keep it relevant?
Thank you. So while we are at it, let me announce that you are welcome to put in your question and answers. We will be taking that up at the end of the sessions. So please feel free, ask Akshat as many questions. He's here to talk to you today. We move on to the first polling question. Now, the idea is that we want to know how much do you know about what's happening in the field of interior design and architecture. These are very simple questions for people who may not be involved. Okay, even if you are a novice, these questions you may be knowing about it. So for example, what are the 2020 trends in interior design? Please go ahead, fill it up, and let's see what everybody thinks. So I believe, Akshat, that trends have become quite an important part of interior space. One didn't realize that it is as soon as almost 1 year. Is it that every year trends change? And if that is so, then I guess there is a lot of reason and rational why things are happening at this fast speed. Because sometimes a building and an interior can take as much as 6 months to 8 months to come up. Okay, here are the answers, and you will have to tell us whether that really is true or not. So 60% have said sustainability, and 38% have said colors inspired by nature. And of course, bling and gold is just 2%. So these are the results of 2020 trends in interior design. Yes, please tell us, Akshat, do you think that's correct?
Um, I think if we run through this short presentation, one might be able to exemplify my answer.
Right.
Let me try and share what I
Okay.
have here.
So I'm just going to quickly ask you a few things. So for example, like we mentioned earlier, trends in interior design is very fast paced nowadays. Would you say the project that you're going to show us now, which is on Trump Gallery, do you think trends sort of influenced the kind of work that you did for the Trump's Gallery? Or if not, then how did you start? What was your process?
Okay, so I'm going to have to run through the Trump Gallery first. Let's
Yes.
see. That would entail me skipping a few things here. Um, Look, I honestly believe that trends, while trends do change and they do emerge and disappear. Now that's the Trump Gallery, and actually it encompasses all three elements that you're talking about: sustainability, uh, the a sort of glamorous space, and a lot of gold and bling.
Oh, it
Um,
does.
so so fundamentally we have to understand that that glamour and luxury is not about only gold and bling. It's about the pursuit of excellence and finesse and longevity. We tend to be Trends tend to be the driven by uh, a system or an industry that needs to that is in a need for refreshment or is in a need to keep regenerating itself. Is in a need, is it's transactionary in nature, which means people need to buy things for an industry to survive. People need to keep redoing things, but that does not mean you make things that are not timeless. So the Trump Gallery is an example of a space that's got that ticks all the boxes that you were talking about. Yet it's a space that's light, airy, lofty, has a positive and optimistic feel to it, and is contextual because you can see there are some patterns and materials that are used that feel that reflect a little bit of India in it. Yet there's a huge international character to it. When we go into the space, we are proud of saying that it's a space that can be completely recycled, is made of a lot of non-first use material, even though it's a Trump space. And the quality of air inside the space is has a PM count of 1, which is the highest level of purity you can get. It
Mhm.
consumes less energy than most such spaces. It uses less wiring and less air conditioning by 10 times than a space of this size. So sustainability becomes important because you have to do things for A, them to last, and B, to leave space for other people to do things in future, which means after we're gone. Sustainability is also important because that allows, it's a guiding factor for you to make things that don't need to be remade very quickly. So a thing should typically last, and a space should last a couple of generations, if not more. That is important even for its aesthetic. But what's the point of doing that if it feels like it's old fashioned or boring or does not give you the right positive energy or impetus that you need to have? So let's remember that eventually most people who are sharing and experiencing your space are not technical people. They're not designers. They're not architects. They just need to feel a certain way when they're in a space. So you have to, and I think the one most important criteria to make people feel is for you to make them feel positive and energized when they enter your space. And that's where the quality of space and adding a touch that makes them feel special uh, is important.
True. I was just wondering whether you think sustainability will also have its own trends within that. So one year it could be something more, maybe nature. The other would be recycling, upcycling. What do you think?
Sustainability is a dynamic concept, and it changes and evolves every year, over and over again. So it's not static in any which way. Um, and that because if you can't consume too much of any one thing or do too much of any one thing for it, because then it's against the idea of being sustainable. It's about controlling consumption, and that by its very nature means when you introduce new things or slightly differentiated things and differentiated ideas, you are going to uh, you're going to have to change your aesthetic, because as your tools change and your technology changes, your expression changes. So there was a time when we were using a lot of local material, local fabric.
Mm-hmm.
Then there came a time when we used where the raw materials and the skill available to make them was scarce, so you couldn't use it. Then came a time when you had to start when and therefore we were using things from abroad. Then came a time where those things from abroad were used to mimic what is local, because people had got bored of a certain kind of expression over many decades. Then everybody didn't want everything to look the same. So yes, there are inherent cycles in everything, but I don't think sustainable development is a question, because as our population increases and as our cities grow, we are consuming more and more. Therefore, we have to be conscious of how we use and reuse things and how we create them.
True. So are we saying that sustainability is a way to work, it's the way of life, and it's the way we live? So irrespective of whatever time span, it is a part of how we are going to go ahead. That's
Yes,
interesting.
there is no question about it.
Okay. Just some very simple question about Trump. Where is this located?
The Trump Gallery is at the Oberoi in Gurgaon, and it was a space made for Trump Jr. as a temporary office when he visited India for 2 weeks.
Is it still existing?
Yes, it's existing. The entry is by invite only.
Okay. Thank you. That was quite an insight into Trump Gallery. I'm going to move on to, I think, Akshat, can we move ahead with the slides? Because there's a polling question we'd like to ask our participants.
Mm-hmm. Sure,
okay.
certainly.
If there's anything else you may like to point out, that would be interesting too.
Well, I think in this particular space, what I think people should look at is how clean a space like this is, how you have a curtain which is, I think this is 8.5 meters tall, and how it falls almost perfectly. Mm-hmm. So there is a certain amount of finesse in execution and quality. Mm-hmm. And I think there is a lot of emphasis on how you make things well. Now, making things well is not just about the training of the person who's making it, it's also about the inherent training of the designer, who has to have the ability to understand how to make something well and communicate that. And yes, of course, to understand how you absorb sound, how do you absorb light, how do you create enough light in an ambience for there to be not too much contrast, not too many shadows. So if we go back, you see there are no shadows in this space.
Correct.
And of course, about some technical detailing and so on and so forth.
Thank you for explaining such details to us. Okay, we are at the next poll question. So, what makes an interior design iconic? I think this is something probably many of us would just guess at it. So, is it aesthetics and function, furniture and lighting, or glitz and technology? So please go ahead and let's see what the participants come up with. Our next project that I'm going to ask you questions on, Akshat, is the interior of the Oberoi Grand at Kolkata. And there is, of course, oh, there it is, the poll 2. Okay, we are still waiting for it. So let's get the answers and we can proceed then with the discussion on Oberoi Grand. So, okay, the participants say aesthetics and furniture and function is 68%, a very high number. The next group says furniture and lighting is 18% of the participants agreeing to that. Glitz and technology, 14%. So really the highest is aesthetics and function. So is that what makes an interior design iconic? What do you think, Akshat?
Well, yes, I think it goes without saying that the your first engagement with something is visual. If you don't want to enter it, or you don't want to go close to it, then you would not. And your second engagement with something is how you operate within it. So that's function. So both together are what makes something timeless or iconic, and that goes without saying. Uh, but those rules change, as your tools and technology changes, so does your need. But what does not change is the need for inspiration and the need for new technique.
True. So I have some information. I don't know, you might like to add on to it. So what I know is that the Oberoi Grand was at Kolkata was refurbished after 50 years and is graded at the highest level of protection, which means conservation, I'm told, which is equivalent to that of Rashtrapati Bhavan. Well, we didn't know all these details, but it seems quite amazing that there are possibly many buildings or monuments in the country having such high level of protection, as you say it. And that means, I was wondering, how did you take on this challenge, which was to be graded at that level? And if you were to look at designing the interior for it, were you looking at aligning it for a particular just performance, or is it the whole value that it was meant to be projecting? If you could help us understand what you did.
So when you have a grade 1 listed building, there's very little you can touch. You can't change the material of the building or any of the elements that go into the building. You can't change you can definitely not change the form or the facade or the structure in any which way. And you have to you have to address it like a conservation building. So it has to look, feel, behave like as if it was made the very first day. That's the reason for conserving your history. So what we've done here is, for this particular project, is that we have used cutting edge parametric and computer techniques to assess what the building had historically. That, of course, your first stages are always going over everything with a pencil and a paper, trying to study things, investigate things by breaking them, doing some probes, doing some tests, and then taking photographs and keeping a record and making drawings. But after that, you assess everything using you formulate and assess and recreate everything using computers and CNC techniques. And that's what allows us to create spaces like this, which are actually made with the same material and the same techniques as they were historically, yet add another layer altogether, which celebrates the history and also celebrates its coming into a new era. Of course, things like this have to be made and have to now perform for contemporary times, which means Today, we're uncomfortable if the air conditioning is anything over 22 degrees. We're uncomfortable if the walls are not absolutely smooth. We're uncomfortable if there are water droplets in the air. We're uncomfortable if there is a smell, and of course, pollution in the air is a now that we're aware of it, is a very big deal. So the building and the construction techniques of the building are extremely conscious of it. Yet we're conscious of the fact that somebody who's coming in today into a place like this is absolutely um, wants a slightly fresh experience. So you bring that in, and you also bring in the memory of the old experience into a space like this.
True.
And of course, natural light. So we've while we've conserved the existing structure and the existing technology, the overall expression of the interior now is timeless and contemporary at the same time.
So do you think they are going to take another few more decades before they go in for another interior overhaul?
Yes, given today's performance criteria, given that it's a public building, it's a hotel with a very high tariff, and it's something that needs to, so doing any kind of work in an operating, running existing hotel is very difficult because the people sleeping there, they're there all the time. So you have very limited working hours. Your focus on doing something has to be very swift and very precise. Once you've done that, you've put in that energy and you invested that kind of money, you need it to last long. And that's where the technical ability, there is a lot you have to invest in yourself creatively, but you also have to take the responsibility of delivering something technically sound to a client, which is as prestigious as this, because there are tremendous health and safety issues that are often ignored in countries like ours when we do spaces like this. But when you have Europeans and foreigners and dignitaries visiting a space like this, so for example, this is a hotel ready for the president. This is a hotel where people like Amitabh Bachchan and Sachin Tendulkar stay every time they visit Calcutta. So you have to ensure that the performance criteria are very strong and the longevity criteria are very strong, both aesthetically and functionally.
Correct. So there are a lot of things to be taken care of. But I had a question about, I know you probably worked on other hospitality or other hotels as well. What would be the difference in the way of working for iconic buildings such as the Kolkata Grand versus other franchisee hotels?
I think usually franchisee properties there is are not as are not. You see, most franchisee properties are working off a catalog, right? So you've already been given a book where certain things are determined. That's a brand standard, and that's a minimum standard for something. Any standard is the minimum criteria that has to be met. It may be a very high standard, but it's the minimum criteria. When you work with a brand like an Oberoi, it's because it is driven by a legendary owner who is involved himself and who's 90 years old, has so much experience, and then it's run, the second in command are his own sons and nephews who are also equally experienced and equally aware, and they take pride in their family name. You have to take care of everything. So in this case, there's a lot of finesse in your experience, in not just how an interior or a space looks, but even how a space performs. Where are the night switches? Where are those switches? What kind of switches? It has to perform incredibly well, but it should be absolutely unobtrusive, because you want everything to get out of your way, yet be there. Simple things like everybody says, automatic night lights. When you step down, the light comes on at the foot of the bed. It's very easy to do, but when you have a night light at that point, you are that light is only carrying you forward so much. More often than not, a hotel room is occupied by either a married couple or by an individual alone. What do you do at home when you have to get out of your bed? You reach out for the night lamp. So while everything else is on the wall, the night lamp, the bell switch is on the lamp. So now there are two ways to do it. Either you reach out for the night lamp to a chain or you reach out to a bell switch. And so even considering where that goes, how high the side table is compared to the mattress that you're sleeping on is important for a project like this. So that there are no, so that you're instantly comfortable and you feel at home, or you feel comfort that is better than your home when you walk in. And last but not the least, you avoid any accidents. You know, you can imagine someone getting injured in a place like this is a huge liability.
Absolutely. Right. Thank you. This is, but I just have one more question for this particular project, because I'm sure a lot of the participants listening to us, they either are working in the area of interiors, and they would be very curious to know, what about the furnishings? I mean, when you say the quality of everything else, infrastructure in the place, you talked about it. Could you help us understand about the fabrics and colors for that, or what do you do for that?
Well, there are some very basic considerations. First, you have to tick those off. You know, how will something last? Not just last when it comes to staining and so on and so forth. As you'll see here, these are flat fabrics. These are flat blue velvet-like fabrics, right? But the criteria for specifying and finding such fabric is, A, of course, you test that it works with a certain kind. With this is a bar, so you'll have coffee spilling on it, you'll have drink spilling on it, you'll have all kinds, but you have to be able to clean it very quickly. It has to work against wear and tear. And remember that you can't have store and store of inventory, so that if something goes bad, you replace it. You can have only maybe 10% of furniture spare to replace or repair or substitute for a while. So you use the highest level of, say, wear count. The wear count is determined by Martindale. So for example, a public area like this would have a 50,000 Martindale fabric, which means that you want, excuse me, your fabrics to look and feel new for at least 10 years.
Okay.
And also remember that because you don't want to invest time, space, energy. Also, I think there's a huge trend today to make things look old already.
Okay.
You know, so there are distressed finishes are in vogue. What we learned with projects like this is that a place will age in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. We have to be able to predict the aging. But when I am paying so much money and I'm walking into a public space, I expect not only hygiene, I expect to feel like things are hygienic. So you want to avoid using super trendy things like, oh, I'm using a distressed finish. No, you can't do that. You can use a technique to make it look engaging without making it look old. So our objective in a project like a five-star hotel is to always have it look new.
Okay.
Always have it look fresh.
Well, those are the tips for all the young designers over here. I think we now come to our next poll. So here it goes. Why are conservation projects important? And I think many of the architects, of course, work on conservation projects, and I'm very sure interior designers would have opportunities too. And the answers are sustaining the history of a place, promote it as a tourist destination, and preserving the built cultural heritage. So let's see what our participants say about this. So what I get from your profile is, Akshat, you've done quite a few projects in conservation, and some of them are very large scale. It's not just maybe about a building or a monument. And that's what we are interested to hear. What your take is, how do you see those projects? Does the context seem very important to you? So we will talk about the Jodhpur project, but I'm just waiting for the polling to come back to us, and we'll see what are the participants saying. Okay, large number saying 60% saying preserving the built cultural heritage. 35% are saying it's sustaining the history of a place. And of course, just 5% saying that this is to promote tourism. Akshat, I'm sure while you are talking about your project, you would be addressing this, but I wanted to understand whether taking on so many conservation projects, is it because something's driving you to look at these projects differently? And you seem to have worked quite a few on many such projects. So we'd like to know what you have been thinking.
So, well, I can sum it up in one line, right? Today there are, and it says on the slide also, there's a huge world of redundant structures and technologies and spaces that can be transformed into something that is meaningful. Again, we tend to ignore them. This is not something new. There is huge design theory books written on it. Uh, and there are differences between something called a pathological monument and a paleolithic monument. That goes by what it says. A paleolithic monument is something that is dead. It does not exist, that does not harbor any life in it or around it. A pathological monument is a monument that serves society, which means, well, if you go to the Red Fort in Delhi, there are people inside it. If you go to the Tughlaqabad Fort, it is not just a dead fort wall, there are people within it. Whereas the old fort, for example, is Paleolithic, there's no life around it. Horse cars, Chandni Chowk, these are all examples of pathological monuments.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we tend to disregard them. We tend to treat them poorly. So what we've done for the JDS project was we actually this was a self-funded project where we collaborated with the royal family, and we earmarked an area. We earmarked an area which is the old city of Jodhpur, from the grain market all the way to the Mehrangarh Fort, which is about 60 square kilometers of area, where we picked nodes. We selected certain nodes, and we decided to refresh them, replenish them. So this was our first few studies. So you see, there was a Bauli, which was, or a step well, which was used as a dumping ground. We spent 2.5 months and a few lakh rupees to sandblast it, clear it out, send out tractor load after tractor load of rubbish, and eventually it became a clean space, which now has fresh water. It's a self-regenerating system, so this is not water that we have put in, is groundwater that keeps cleaning itself. Now there are fish here. There was no life in it. There are fish, and now it's become a tourist destination. It's a democratic space where poor and rich people all sort of congregate and celebrate together. It becomes a tourist destination. It also becomes a space where you can add some new elements to preserve or to continue the history of the place. Finally, every night, rather than relying on technology and lights, we pay someone 5,000 rupees to go and put diyas in every niche. So with a small amount of money, there's nothing that can replicate the warmth and energy of a diya. And yet, you don't have to rely on complicated answers every time. Some of the most memorable things are simple, and we use a small radio, a small speaker to run the chants of Shiva into this stepwell every day, and it reverberates, and the entire village enjoys the sound, and they all congregate, and it's almost like it becomes a meditative space at night. So through the day, it's an interactive space and a space for activity by people jumping in the water, and at night it becomes a space where people come and contemplate. uh, it became the most tweeted thing on Instagram. We also hired some local artists to do cartographs. We created an information center in the form of a cafe, so people can actually go there and uh, get, well, why they can buy an inexpensive coffee. They can also learn about the history of the place. So it's not a enterprise for profit, but it's an enterprise for sustaining itself. So disguising an information center as a cafe makes it more interesting to people who are not interested necessarily in information. Or you can go and visit it even if you've got the information you need, but the energy remains. As you can see inside here, there's there's paintings from the old family. There's a little timeline for Jodhpur and how things happened here. And of course, then even that for us became a very tweeted and spoken about thing. And to give you another example, there's a small Haveli which was this over the years. The family it had gone through decay, family change. It looked like this, and it wasn't a very inviting space. It was just cleaned out and relit, and today this houses Good Earth and Nicobar. What we also did here is we programmed what we believe are the best Indian brands that hold the essence of India, such as Nicobar, Good Earth, Forest Essentials, and those are then they sort of cleaned out, and so everything is given out as a cheap hotel, but even was given out in the past as a cheap hotel, low level tourism. But then we refurbished it and we sort of reprogrammed it for it to become a little more enriching, which then motivates the people around it, the surroundings, to also do something similar and not just treat these as little dingy cubby holes like they were in the past. They were never meant to be, but they became that.
I can really see how passionate you feel about this. Where else you think such projects have been converted into, public places which can be contemporary and are being used in a, in the normal social manner?
There is another project we've done in Delhi, which is a place called the Dhanmil Complex, where some people may have visited a place called Napa Dori Cafe. We are partners in a non-profit enterprise called the Common Room, which is a place for young people to go seek mentorship, seek ideas. You can meet industry leaders there, and it's all for free. There is another place called Motherland, which we've done in the Dhanmil compound, which is the Motherland magazine, which is a magazine for all that is unique to India in terms of culture and trends and whatnot, which is not pure commercial enterprise, but it is about the depth and richness of our culture, not in a mummified, old-fashioned way, but presented in a way which is new. So there's always opportunity, and I think, and we're always open to people reaching out to us for. You see, I mean, I think one of the abilities we found is to be, once we work with a certain kind of client set, and you spend more than a decade setting up an office in a certain way, with high standards, you can always take those standards and percolate them down to an easier level. So passing our learnings from a hotel onto a public space is what we try and do, without trying to make the public space feel like a hotel.
Thank you. And Akshat, there are so many questions by the participants. So if you are ready, I'm going to ask you one by one, and perhaps some more of these questions are going to throw up light on what your experience and what do you think about that. Many on sustainability, I can see that. So Sakshi is asking, which materials are most easy to recycle? I know, technical question. But...
anything that has a long life. So materials such as steel and glue laminated timber can be recycled. If something is manufactured in a module, it can be recycled. And then there are materials such as cardboard, carbon fiber that are biodegradable, that can also be recycled, but they're in a different way. So I think I rate reusability higher than recyclability. So when you reuse something, you can reuse it in a different way, and you save a lot more. Recycling also entails, by its very nature, a new process, right? So, and we tend to misunderstand certain things. A glass cold drink bottle, a glass Coca-Cola bottle, is a reusable bottle. A plastic Coca-Cola bottle, which is recyclable, is recycled. It is cut into its basic form and reformed. It is not reused. Glass bottle is cleaned and reused and refilled. So that's, I mean, and I think we should always be aware of those things when we're working. Concrete is the least recyclable material. Plaster of Paris is the least recyclable material. Gypsum board is least recyclable. I think the most commonly used materials in our building industry are not reusable or recyclable, and that's actually the problem. We must understand that the construction industry is responsible for 70% of the pollution in this world, whereas it is only the other 30% is of the other 30%, 20% is attributed to the transportation industry.
So another question on sustainability. Sarika's asking, how can you use sustainable upcycled or recycled designs and still make them look beautiful and trendy?
I think that's really dependent on your skill set. I think you have to always set the benchmark to understand how is something going to look timeless. How is it going to be? How is it going to make me feel optimistic? I think often people tend to associate recycled and recyclable materials with things that look junky and, may I say, tacky in some ways, right? So you have to, I think a lot of how you make something, how you design something is based on your skill set and your values. And remember, never oversell a value, even though you're compromising on the longevity and aesthetic of something. And by longevity, I also mean aesthetic longevity. I can make something that looks very good for 5 minutes or five days. It's not set design, because if it's only going to look good for such a short period of time, your entire effort of trying to conserve on it is wasted, because someone's going to get bored of it, or is going to get sick of it, and is going to want to recycle it or change it.
Correct. So coming to that, there are some questions on trends, and they're asking how much should you rely on trends when designing a space, but also how can we keep us updated with the trends changing every year?
I think one of the things that's very important with trends is that you have to ignore them. You have to make sure that what you do has its own unique set of values. They have to fit into a set of universal values of, and those universal values are very well established, and you're taught all that in school, and from first year to fifth year always. Um, but you have to stick to those. Those are your fundamental barometers for understanding something. Then come value systems that are your own, which is your own unique story and your own technique, and the way you address things with a certain quality. uh, then come trends. Now trends are not, I think it's a very abused term. I think one has to keep an eye out for emergent uh, technologies, for emergent materials, which means till a few years ago, we were not using carbon fiber in the construction industry. Today, carbon fiber is cheaper than steel for us, for the kind of projects we do. Concrete was an emerging trend in the 1920s. Today, steel is re-emerging as a reusable material. But steel is older than concrete in the construction industry that dates back to 1800s. So, like I said, these things are cycles. It's a bit like bell-bottom jeans. They were there in the 70s. And they came back in the late 90s, but in a slightly different way.
Absolutely.
And also remember, people who are fashionable can always pull it off, whatever they're wearing.
But not everybody.
Not everybody.
Okay, and there comes a question on Vastu Shastra. How can one incorporate Vastu Shastra in the architecture, especially when it clashes with the designer's ideas? Is that something which is followed
I'm sorry?
very much in the industry?
Yes, I think, I think one has to be aware of Vastu, because I don't know how much Vastu has become a trend, unfortunately. There is a logic to it's not entirely a pseudoscience. There is some rationale behind it. There are many other such sciences. There is geomancy, there is feng shui, and they all have their own logics. And those logics are, when you read into it, you will find a certain logic. But fundamentally, Vastu was meant for buildings made in isolation. It was meant for temples. It was meant for courtyard homes. It was meant for palaces, because you were building on virgin ground. Now, when you are building in a when you're building in a city like Delhi, where you're building on a plot, how can you say one plot is good and the other plot right next to that is not? It can't be that. So I think people often use Vastu, and you can always download an app on your mobile phone called Vastu Compass. And I find that the majority of people prophesizing Vastu or following, and you can test it. You can just write it down on a piece of paper, so what they've said, and write it down again. Or what the other person said, you can pretty much overlay it and see it matches with the Vastu Compass. I think the understanding of energies of a space are deeper. It is related. It's just like wearing a a sort of ring, a piece of jewelry. Different things, different micro energies react with different people differently, right? So we are all made of elements, and that's how it is. It is important to incorporate them. There are consultants who do that specifically, and they are professionals who can be engaged. And like you would be a professional to in interior design or in architecture, there are they're specialized professionals in their field, and they're part of their own uh, their service to their profession is to keep upgrading their own knowledge base. The same applies for you. Don't try and learn it yourself. I think find a person who you can refer to for it, and ensure you find the right person who's not just using a Vastu compass and fooling you.
I think, Alok, you must have learned a lot from what Akshat has just informed us about Vastu Sastra. I'm going to move on to a question on Humayun's tomb and Sundar Nursery. They've been restored by the Aga Khan Trust. Do you think similar restoration efforts should be made for the Red Fort, Old Fort, and other monuments?
Is that a question
An
directed to me?
opinion, I guess they're asking, he's asking for your opinion. And so it's just to say, do you think they are good enough, restored good enough, or they need better restoration?
I think everything needs to be better, right? You can do the best thing that you can make your best effort and turn around, and you will still find if you are a good professional, you will find reason to better it. So knowing a little bit about how these places were restored, I think it's a good starting point. It's a good, just as I would say our Jodhpur project is a good starting point, just as I would say Thanla is a starting point. It's you start at a place, and based on certain parameters, limitations, your own abilities, you reach somewhere. The you have to uh, you judge a project based on what you see. That's what you and I can judge it as people who are not involved. But as people who are involved, they know how far they've stretched a buck. They know how far they've stretched time. Uh, and yes, and I think if a good professional is involved, and or a seat or and good values are involved, then you will always look back at anything and say, oh, I could have done it better. Nothing's ever good as we want it to be, as good as we want it to be.
Absolutely. I keep on hearing you reiterate, the certain values of quality and your own passion or your own ideas, finding enough confidence to apply that. Uh, there's a question on it's a technical question. So in historical times, Havelis and monument walls were built using natural material. Can such walls be built in these times, and how much would it cost?
Mm, I think the first question I will ask is it relevant to make something as it was made many years ago today?
Mm-hmm.
Do I need to make a Haveli today?
Mm-hmm.
Why should I make a Haveli today?
Mm-hmm.
Is it relevant any longer? Would you want to go and live in a cave? We started out living in caves. Would you want to do that today? Um, so if there is something that does not have a mainstream requirement for society, I don't think one should waste energy, time, and resource on it, because it may be coming out of your pocket or your client's pocket, but eventually it is a universal resource. You know, you have to understand the need to change patterns of consumption. Having said that, to answer your question directly, material in today's day and age is available on volume. Labor is available on volume. So, and old buildings used to have a cheaper palette of materials, but the volume of material they would consume would be significantly higher. So, and as time has moved on, newer materials are processed through industrial production, therefore reducing waste and increasing the efficiency in their manufacture. Um, as time moves on, the efficiency of workmanship and craftsmanship and labor in that in new age or newer materials such as, and by new I categorize concrete as that as well, has been optimized. That is not the same for an old technique or an old material. So it will always cost you a lot more. How much more is really up for debate. If I was to give you an example of the Oberoi Calcutta project, no matter how efficiently we used our computers and machines and whatnot, it still cost us 3 times per square foot when compared to the Oberoi New Delhi, which is a much more cutting edge building. So there is, here you compare a building which was built in the 70s refurbished, and you compare a building that was built in the 1800s refurbished. What we spent on a 350,000 square foot project is less than what we are now going to spend on a 70,000 square foot project. That's the difference. Is it worth it?
You know, Akshat, there are many, many questions which are technical questions, and I hope we will be able to take them on later after the sessions. But there's one personal question which I think we should end it with, and it's, well, it's not so personal, it's about your education. The participant wants to know whether I think, okay, how much do you relate with with what you learned in London, and the working experience that you had over there, and what you are doing now in India? So do you think that has been?
Well, I think there are many dimensions to that question, and I mean any answer has a reason. You know, that's why I think when you're in school they ask you what do you think and why. You know, so I think the why is as important as what. Um, yes, that, you know, when you study, there are many aspects to it. The first is your own sense of rigor. How hardworking am I? How committed am I? Let us say that you are 100 on that, 100. Everyone's equally hardworking and committed. Second is your own inherent talent and skill, um, which I think can be taught to yourself. That depends again on how hardworking and committed you are. Character, you know, your own strength of character is something you either have or you don't have. You know, that's character that makes you work hard or commit. When you go abroad, you are set amongst a group of people who are usually who don't have to study in college after they're 18 or 17 when they graduate, and their parents are not paying for the education. It's more often than not the government is paying for the education, which they pay off for the rest of their life or for many, many decades. It's not given to them for free. We tend to think that, oh, my batchmates are studying on subsidy. They're not. They've been given the money at that time, but they have to pay it off with a significant. Student loans are have an incredible amount of interest associated with them abroad. So they are definitely more motivated in that sense than most people studying abroad who are from the subcontinent. So what you learn is a work ethic. You learn that, look, everyone's equal. No one's going to be treated special. You're going to have to work equally hard, and you're going to get called out on merit, because there is no such thing as a free lunch abroad. So it builds your work ethic and your appreciation of what you're learning, because everyone's in class all the time. No one's bunking class. And the next is, when you're there, it gives you the opportunity for exposure. So when you're there, when I was there, I would take all the free time I had to travel, whether it was my own money or any such thing, whether it was sleeping sleeping in a bus while I was traveling or flying, whatever it took, it was to make the most of the years I spent there, which meant in terms of work, in terms of studies, in terms of learning and ability and skill set, but also in terms of exposure. So I would get out every weekend to see. I had a list of 400 buildings that I wanted to see, and I think I managed to touch about 360. I missed 40, which I covered in subsequent years, and that becomes a part of your, because travel changes you. As you travel, no matter how you travel, you will get scars. You will get scarred by seeing things. You will get scarred because you'll get into arguments, into scuffles. You'll make friends. You'll make people who you may meet. But those scars that you acquire through travel are always scars which are intense, and they change you, and they change you in a beautiful way. And I think you learn how to cook. I didn't know how to cook. I don't cook anymore. I never used to cook, but I learned a little. I learned how to make egg and toast when I was abroad. Um, which I never made when I was working and studying here. So
That sounds really
exposure.
very exciting, Akshat. I can see that probably many of them listening to you are already thinking about if they were to have the opportunity to go out. But as an educator, I must also say, those of you, whether you travel out or whether you study here, it is all about what Akshat is saying, that you do the same, you have the same discipline about wanting to learn, to be focused, to be disciplined. You can do the same things while you're here or whether you are there. You can still travel in India. I mean, travel out, meet people. These are all experiences which enrich you as designer, as a professional, and as a human being. We are really at the end of our session. And Akshat, I have to thank you for really opening up your heart and your every bit of knowledge that you have. I'm sure there's still a lot more. There are many, many more questions I would like to get them across sometimes and be able to, answer this to your participants at some point. So we have a poll over here. We'd like you to please answer that. What do you think we should do next? Of course, many of you have been attending, coming back to us again and again. Thank you for that. We love seeing you over here. Please look at all the answers and tick mark the areas that you would really like to have the webinar on next time. Please go ahead and mark that. And I must say that I can see that Akshat isn't very much older to you guys, but and that's the reason they seem to be listening to you a lot, I think. And probably they believe in your experience to be much more, more contemporary. And I'm sure this is something they would like to. Your work must have inspired them a lot. I hope in future we should be able to bring them more designers and people who have developed their value system based on what their thinking has been, what their experiences have built up. So we look forward to your answer on this poll. And so there we are. Okay, there is a huge number wanting to look at technology in interior space. That's a topic people are interested in. The next interest is on upscaling your home aesthetics, and an equal number in sustainability and interiors, leadership and communication and design. So, well, we're really happy to get this result from you, and we'd like to be able to bring these sessions to you as soon as possible. There's another one which we are not going to wait for, but I would be happy to have you mark these. Would you like to hear more about our programs? So we bring this to you from JSID Institute of Design in Delhi. We are having an interior design program, but more than that, we are interested to bring knowledge, exposure, and discovery of design to you guys. Help us understand what you want, and we'll be happy to do that. So please, let's hear, would you like to know more about our programs? And Akshat, once again, I want to thank you. I hope to see you once the lockdown is over, and I'm sure many students still want to know a lot more from you. So we'll figure out how that can be done. But This has been an excellent evening. I think many of us who are not exactly just from interiors have learned a lot too. So if you bring you some more in webinar, probably I can get a degree in interior design. This is just joking.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. And please remember all that Akshat has talked about, not only through the question and answers, but through his projects. And if you want to know more, put on your questions and we will be in touch with Akshat Bhatt, principal founder of architecture discipline. Thank you. Please don't forget to fill up a survey at the end of the session. As you click the chat, as you leave this meeting, there's a survey for you guys. Please fill it up. We look forward to hearing from you. Bye-bye. Thank you.